Tonight's meeting is taking place on the traditional territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. We extend our appreciation to the Syilx Okanagan people for the opportunity to hold this meeting here today. My name is Andrea. I'm the Communications and Engagement Specialist with the city. Joining me tonight are Joanne Klebb, Communications and Engagement Manager with the City of Penticton, Stephen Collier, who's the Senior Planner, and the slide says Audrey, but she's away, and so we have Blake, who is our Director of Development Services. The purpose of tonight's session is to ensure you're aware of and understand this proposal, to provide you with opportunities to learn more and ask questions. And we want to include your feedback for the applicant, staff, and council. So a reminder that our focus is on whether or not the community supports the change in future land use designation, and that the conceptual designs may change according to the feedback received tonight and throughout the engagement process. So again, this session is going to be recorded. This is just so that we can accurately capture the feedback we received during our discussions. And we're going to go over a brief presentation and then we'll open the floor for your questions at the end. So we don't have a super large group. So if you're comfortable raising your hand and you want to speak, we can do that. Or if you just prefer to put your questions in the chat, we'll answer them as we go. And I think with that, I'll just hand this over to Stephen for his presentation.
Thanks, Andrea, and good evening, everybody who's able to come out tonight for the online information session. The next section of the presentation here is going to focus on the development proposal the city's received for 1704 Government Street. This property is 10 acres in size, and it's located across Government Street from the Penticton Regional Hospital. The site's at the edge of the industrial area of the city and contains a large warehouse building. It was previously used for a manufactured home and trailer operation, and is currently used for a bottle washing operation. The applicant's proposing to redevelop the site as a high-density mixed-use development. The preliminary plans show between 1,200 and 1,500 apartments on site with a mix of strata and rental tenures. Office and retail uses are proposed near Government Street. Given the scale of this proposal, it would be built out in phases over many years. At this early stage, the concept might change and be further refined based on public engagement feedback and further approval processes. The next couple slides go over a few images that were submitted with the application package. So this one really shows the site context and the surrounding neighborhood around the site. So you can see in the center of the property, there is a large warehouse existing already, as well as some outdoor storage. And Peerless Trailer Manufacturing is located in the bottom right-hand corner adjacent to the site. And you can see on the opposite side, the Penticton Regional Hospital across Government Street towards the west. The next slide here shows the proposed development layout. So the proposal consists of about 11 buildings with an internal road network. The main access point is showing as Government Street, but the applicants and city are exploring options for a secondary access point into the site as well. That's outlined in the traffic impact assessment that I'll touch on in a little bit. The site shows some connections through to the Ellis Creek pathway along the south side. And you can see with the image on the right, different uses proposed across the site. So residential is shown in yellow, retail uses are shown in brown, and office shown in blue. And you can see that those commercial uses are really clustered towards the Government Street side of the property. The next slide here shows conceptual building heights. So the building heights proposed to range between 6 and maybe up to 12 stories. Those potential 12-story buildings would be in the south end of the site, the 3 buildings outlined in black on this image. And it's worth noting that there's a substantial grade change up to Carmi Avenue and Peerless, so both towards the north and east neighbors of this site. The OCP amendment is just one of several approvals that would be required for this proposed development. In addition to changing the future land use designation, the site would also need to be rezoned and have development permits issued on a phase-by-phase basis. These applications require council's decision as well, and the development plans would be more and more refined at each step of the process. The OCP is a living document, and applications to amend the OCP are expected from time to time. While the OCP guides land use decisions up to 2045, it's likely that over that time frame, changing trends or unexpected events will require the city to consider amendments to the plan. Proposals to amend the OCP that respect the overall vision and values of the OCP, but allow for innovation and adaptation as new opportunities arise, are considered by City Council with the following considerations as noted on the slide. So that's considering the alignment of the proposal with the broad OCP vision and goals, the provision of demonstrable social, economic, and environmental benefits to the community, the assessment of cost and other implications for infrastructure, including parks, roads, utilities, water, sanitary, storm sewer, and public facilities, the suitability of the proposal to context in terms of form, character, and design, and the fact that all proposed amendments must be accompanied by meaningful public engagement, such as the process currently underway, and that's in addition to the formal public hearing. The next two slides show staff's initial analysis of the proposal and includes some considerations for further review as the proposal proceeds. The development would certainly contribute to Penticton's housing need by providing 1,200 to 1,500 apartments and a mix of tenures. The proposed building heights, with some up to 12 stories, are similar to that of the hospital building height. The building heights and locations will need to be refined to ensure there's no conflicts with the hospital helipad approach. Staff note that the office and retail uses proposed could support the hospital across the street, as there's limited commercial space in the immediate area. The site has been underutilized as an industrial property for over 2 years, and the site's located at the edge of the industrial area, and it's the only industrial property with driveway access onto Government Street north of Ellis Creek. So it's important to consider the industrial lands around this site, as well as the fact that the site itself is industrial designated today. Traffic impacts from the proposed development must be considered and planned for through the development build-out, with major consideration for a second access point to the site. There's important balance to consider between providing more housing in Penticton and also preserving the industrial land base, because both are listed as priorities in the OCP. As I noted before, this is only initial analysis, and staff will present the full analysis report, including community feedback, after we hear from the community through this engagement period. The OCP amendment application was reviewed by the city's technical planning committee, and that's a group of internal city staff who review all development applications. The group provided future servicing, landscaping, and urban design comments to the applicant to help refine the development plans. Ultimately, the developer will be responsible for all costs associated with upgrading Government Street and providing services to the site, including water, sewer, and electrical services. Staff required a traffic impact assessment to be completed at this early stage of the proposal to assess the traffic impacts from the development on the surrounding area, and the applicant has submitted a draft traffic impact assessment report, which is available for public review through the engagement period. Further refinements to the study will be required as the development concept details are refined. So right now, staff are following the procedure for community engagement for OCP amendments, and that involves many steps to raise awareness and give the public opportunities to learn about the proposal and provide feedback. Shape Your City Penticton is the main hub for information on the project, and that's where you can fill out a feedback form and share your views if you haven't already. A notice sign has been posted on the property, and letters were mailed to nearby residents within 240 meters of the site. Interest groups, including the Penticton Industrial Development Association, Interior Health, and the Penticton Indian Band, have been contacted for consultation. News releases and newspaper ads also help raise community awareness about the proposal. Community engagement is required for proposals that change the future land use designation on a specific property. In this case, the applicant is proposing to change the future land use designation from industrial to mixed use to facilitate the development of a high-density mixed-use development on the site. The results of the engagement period will be shared with City Council, the applicant, and the community after the engagement period ends. And that wraps up my overview of the proposal. I'll pass it back to Andrea.
Thanks. So this is our proposal, not our, sorry, the proposal. So we'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do it in the chat. I think Joanne's going to help us look after those questions today. And if you'd rather put your question in an email, please feel free to send it to Stephen Collier at stephen.collier@penticton.ca, and we'll get back to you within 2 business days. So with that, we'll open it up to our guests.
Well, and while people are thinking about what questions they may have, we have had our first engagement session where we did have a chance to talk to the community and find out a little bit more about what kind of questions and concerns they may have. And one of the main questions that we heard was around access to the site. And do you think you could explain a little bit more about the access that's proposed, Stephen, and what options there may be?
Yeah, so the main access point to this site is along Government Street.
Do you want to
And
bring up the map, Stephen? Or maybe Andrea can?
I'll have Andrea be my
Okay,
tech support on this one.
let's do that so people can see.
Yeah, for sure. So right across the street from the entry to the hospital is where this access point to the development is proposed. Maybe on the next slide, it shows the best actually with the concept. Yeah, right there. So as you can see, the Government Street itself is not set up for a full access intersection. So that's one of the options being looked at, is turning that from a right in, right out of the hospital to providing full access to both the hospital and this development site. The details of exactly what that looks like haven't been refined yet because, again, we're still at early stages of this proposal. And then I'll mention too the second access point again. So the traffic impact assessment that was submitted looked at four other options rather, for second access. So potentially going uphill to Carmi Ave, going through the industrial property towards Dartmouth. There is a small stub of Page Avenue, which dead ends to the site, or looking at potentially a bridge across Ellis Creek to Industrial Avenue to the south. So each of those options has their own unique challenges and advantages, and they'll be considered as the project moves forward with which one is the most suitable, and also at what stage of the development that second access would be triggered.
Now, another one of the main topics of conversation was about the adjacent industrial activity and the need for industrial lands. What kind of information do we have about the industrial land availability?
Yeah, so in 2018, there was a study done citywide in Penticton about commercial and industrial land, both current supply and projections for the future. So that study helped inform the 2019 OCP. And the study recognized that there's really limited industrial land in Penticton, and there's not much opportunity to designate new industrial land. So the report recommended focusing on infilling and intensifying the industrial area that already exists. So maybe looking at potentially underutilized sites or sections of properties that perhaps could be used for other purposes. One example, there's a lot of one-story buildings in the industrial park, potentially looking at options to build up and make use of the land that we have. We are looking at seeing if there's been any updated trends in industrial land since that report was completed, because it's been about 5 years now. And just for comparison, we did our housing needs assessment in 2017, and we're just going through the process of updating that. So in a way, it makes sense if we're looking at our housing needs to look at our industrial land use needs as well, and see if that report and those recommendations are still valid as of today. So for one example, that report in 2018 projected that there'd be quite a bit of demand for potentially cannabis production, because that was sort of the new thing of the day, and maybe we haven't seen that take off in the way that it expected. So we are looking at reviewing that. It's definitely an important consideration, because right now with the designation of industrial, the result of this application would be a reduced industrial land base in Penticton, but perhaps also looking more regionally beyond our boundaries. Are there industrial lands available on PIB? I know that OK Falls is going through an industrial expansion right now. Well, not ideal, but is there some need or some opportunity in our region to accommodate some of that demand for industrial as well? So we're looking at all those options and all those factors at play. And this industrial lands piece is definitely on our radar as we continue considering the application.
And I believe at our open house, we did have a representative from the adjacent industrial operation Peerless. What kinds of concerns did they have about the proposal?
Yeah, so they had shared concerns about the impact that they would have on residences, and then in turn the complaints or negative impacts that those residents could experience being beside their operation. They noted that, like a lot of industrial users, there's some noise involved with their operations. There's some fumes and potentially longer hours. They might start early in the morning and potentially go later into the evening. So I think there's some concerns with the shift in what could be developed on this property if it does go to mixed use, with having residences side by side. But there may be some ways to look at buffering in between those uses to try to protect the industrial from residential and also protect the residential from industrial right beside. So that could look a few different ways. Right now, there is a bit of grade change between those properties and sort of a bank with some trees as well. So perhaps that could be enhanced. Perhaps this concept plan may be refined to provide a wider buffer between any buildings on this site versus the Peerless site. There's certain elements that could be built into the design to help mitigate impacts. It might not completely eliminate impacts, and I think that's something for staff and for council to consider when this application goes forward. But perhaps there's ways to design to try to achieve a balance between both of those land uses being side by side.
And we also had quite a few residents in the area who were concerned about the potential addition of several hundred vehicles on government. And so you mentioned that there is a traffic impact assessment. What were the findings? How would something like that be managed? What can you tell attendees tonight about how that would be considered in a proposal like this?
Yeah, so the city received a draft traffic impact assessment for this development, and there's still more back and forth discussions to be had about the details of that and expanding on that for a full report. But the initial review looked at full build out, what the impact could be on the street network, and recommended that with those changes, things like providing a second access and providing a full access intersection on Government Street, if done the right way, could manage the additional demand. And one other thing to consider too is that Interior Health has an interest in this site for their employees as well. They're hearing from their employees that it's hard to find housing. So I think there's some good synergies there potentially where people might not have to commute too far or commute in a car to go too far if that's the option that they choose for themselves. And also too, this site is serviced by bike lanes. It's close to Main Street. So there may be options where people can travel without necessarily having to hop into their car. But the ultimate traffic impact assessment will be determined based on the final number of units envisioned for this site. And because we still have a range, we just don't know those details quite yet. But these are the things that are being looked at this stage. And we definitely hear the concerns and the comments about traffic, especially along Government Street. We know that's a key corridor in Penticton and already serves a lot of traffic as it is. So making sure that should this development proceed, the impacts that it has are mitigated to the best degree possible.
Great. And Andrea, I don't want to take over your facilitation, but I noticed that that we do have a question from Brad. Brad is bravely offering to ask the first question from our attendee group. Did you want to read that out for everyone, Andrea?
I actually can't see Brad's
Oh,
question.
okay. Then I shall do that.
Yeah, sorry about that, Brad.
So Brad's asking, is this the right place to increase residential density? Do the downtown businesses have concerns with increasing density here rather than closer to downtown?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've heard some comments from people about the downtown sites that they see as vacant and wouldn't those be good to be developed before this site? Really with private properties, it depends on the property owner when they choose to proceed with development. And we haven't heard an official position yet from the Downtown Penticton Association, but hopefully we do connect with them and hear something from them with the downtown business voice. This is an interesting site because it is pretty centrally located in Penticton. It's across from a really major employer, being the hospital and Interior Health. And being centrally located, it's pretty easy access to the different employment areas and service areas in the city. So that's really the question that we're putting out to the community too, is this considered a good place for the density that's being proposed? And that's one of the main questions with the land use change going from industrial to mixed use. What does the community feel about that? Because this is an opportunity that wasn't envisioned when the OCP was developed. And that's why we're leading the engagement period to kind of see what groups like the Downtown Business Association, other groups, and individual community members feel about the proposed density at this site. So good question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's really not about either or, it's more about and. So because we do have a number of proposals for the downtown area, and this is yet another opportunity that can be considered. And so also at the open house, there were people that were curious about where this demand from housing came from, what's changed since the last OCP that we're looking at redesignating industrial land for residential use.
Yeah, the 2019 OCP was developed after a period of slower growth than what we've experienced in the last 5 years, 5+ years. So the OCP was developed with a lower growth rate per year than we're seeing in reality over the last few years. So just for comparison, the census data came out for 2021, and we're seeing an almost 1.9% per year population growth, where the OCP project is 0.45. So growing almost 3 times faster on an annual basis, averaged out, than the OCP expected. Now, there might be times of faster growth and slower growth over the next couple decades, but what we're experiencing is quite a bit more than the OCP projected for. And if this keeps up, we won't have a lot of land designated for all the housing demand that would be required with that population growth by the time the OCP timeframe is up in 2045. So that's why we're going through a citywide OCP review at this time with a focus on housing policies. And the city just recently updated, like I mentioned earlier, our housing needs assessment, which takes into account both demographic data, population StatsCan data, and then actually reaching out to different employers in town, major employers and industry sectors and interest groups, to get a sense for what the community is feeling about the housing need, as well as what the numbers show. And those results will go forward to City Council soon. And the results of the housing needs assessment will help inform any future housing decisions in the city. So it could help inform decisions on a site like this one on Government Street, but also help inform our decisions on housing policy at a citywide level as part of our full OCP housing review.
And another question that came up the other night is that people are curious, like, do we have the infrastructure to support development on this scale? Do we have the water, the sewer infrastructure, and how does that work? Is that something you can help people understand, Stephen?
Yeah, so our main treatment facilities can accommodate quite a bit more population than we currently have in Penticton. We have a lot of growth to go yet before we hit max on our treatment facilities, like our water treatment plant, our sewage treatment plant. Looking around this site, if there are any infrastructure deficiencies, like in terms of pipe sizes or things like that, if it's only driven because the development is proceeding, then it's up to the developer to pay for those upgrades. Developments also pay development cost charges to the city, so those are determined at a city-wide level, and it's basically costed out to try to accommodate all the projects that the city needs to complete to keep up with growth. So that could be things like road works, it could be things like park work, and the underground utilities like water and sewer works. The projects have been identified across the city, and then when developments occur, regardless of where in the city they are, they help pay on a per unit basis the cost to help get those projects completed to keep up with the growth that we're expecting.
Yeah, and that's really actually a great story, because that was some work that the city recently completed, was updating the development cost charges bylaw and updating the integrated infrastructure master plan. These are such jargony words, but they're really about identifying all that infrastructure and making sure we're planning for it, because prior to updating our development cost charges bylaw, projects like this could come along and we wouldn't necessarily properly allocate the future costs of infrastructure. But now that we have those documents in place, we can ensure that any infrastructure required that's associated with growth gets funding from the people that are going to be benefiting from it. So I think that's a great story for the city. Okay, so Frank has offered up a question for us, Stephen, and I'm going to, Frank, I see that you would like to address us, address staff. So yes, we can actually, at least I think we can do it, make it possible for you to speak, or perhaps not. Let's see.
I think he should be able to, if he unmutes his mic, I believe.
Perfect.
Hey, there we go.
Oh, yay. Hi, Frank.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, please go ahead
Yeah,
and
thank you.
share your comment with the group.
Yeah, one of of course, the most critical things that I feel as a homeowner that has to pay taxes on my house is the impact of the loss of the industrial area that's going to be if this project goes ahead, because it's going to be, it's a tipping point piece of property. The critical mass of our industrial area is already below what it should be. And we have lost a number of economic benefits in the area because of the decrease in the industrial area that we have. For instance, we used to get, all the couriers used to fly airplanes in the morning with air freight and stuff. We lost that because we just didn't have enough business here to support that. And so places like Kelowna, which have a critical mass, are desperate for industrial land. They have taken to trying to find ways to convert golf courses into industrial land because they understand the tremendous economic benefit that you get from industrial corporations. You were talking about ones like Peerless just north of you. There's a company that brings in $4 million every month of outside currency into the and improves the prosperity of Penticton that way, not to mention a huge payroll. And that's just one business. We have probably 3 or 4 businesses in the industrial area that bring in as much money as the entire tourist sector does in this town. And we wouldn't dream of planting this project on any kind of tourist land or parkland. It wouldn't even get this far in terms of a proposal. And so it's kind of concerning that we're going to this extent when we need to preserve this kind of land because of the economic impact that it has and can have and will have. We're talking about this project taking 10 years. Well, in 10 years, who knows what business could end up being on this project, hiring 50, 100 people at 2 to 3 times the wages that the service industry pays. And the benefit to the community with having millions of dollars of hard currency coming into the town every month based on that business being here. On the other hand, you have this proposal, which, if you look at the macroeconomics of it, is going to be a net negative to the economic prosperity of town in terms of what the project actually does. Money will be leaving Penticton. If it didn't, then the developers wouldn't be interested in doing this. They need that money that's going to leave town, and it's going to leave town and go to them. And the company that's doing this is a huge company. They have deep pockets, and this is how they continue to have deep pockets, is going to Penticton type communities and drawing all this economic value out of it. And so that's a real concern that we should have, that we're not only losing income producing property, but we're converting it into property that's going to have a negative economic impact on the city. Granted, it's going to solve some housing concerns, but not for the existing tax base. It's only for people that are going to come here. And to be realistic, at some point, and I'm really concerned about places like Kelowna that are talking about 40 to 60,000 more people moving in. There is a limit to what the Okanagan can support in terms of water. And at some point, you're going to have to say, no, we can't have more people here. And to infill this piece of property makes no economic sense whatsoever, especially when there's so many different alternatives where this could be. As far as the hospital is concerned, I, for one, really don't want to see the hospital spend any more money on office space. I'd rather see them spend money on hospital staff and not on infrastructure that supports administration. We already have way too much of that in interior health, and we need more boots on the ground and not boots in offices. And so it's not going to be a plus for the city to have that there, not in the long run. There's a whole pile of other aspects to this. I mean, you're talking about traffic. I mean, you're going to move heaven and earth to make traffic even look good on paper, but we have gridlock there 2 or 3 times every day on that piece of road. There's nothing that you can do that's going to be able to absorb the traffic that's going to come off of there. It's going to be a nightmare no matter what options that you guys come up with. There's just, and of course that's going to spill into the surrounding areas as commercial vehicles, truckers, and people in a hurry are going to try to find other ways around this terrible traffic point. And it's just going to spread out and beyond. We already have serious problems in the industrial area with traffic, and this is just going to make it horrible. So those are a few of the points I have. I have more, but I don't want to take all of the time here that you guys have. So thanks for letting me speak. Appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your points, Frank, and I wrote a bunch of them down. And I also hope that you'll take some time to fill out our feedback form so that you can say it in your own words as well. But we'll definitely convey your thoughts to council as well when this is brought forward. So thank you for that. And yeah, and it's great that tonight is about people hearing what fellow residents are thinking, as well as what is being considered in the proposal. So I appreciate you being willing to address the group. We do have another question from Brad. Brad, did you want to talk? Because we can, if you put your hand up, we can turn your microphone on. If not, I can just read your question, which I'll go ahead and do. And so Brad's curious that with the lack of industrial land, have businesses been experiencing difficulties finding suitable sites for their businesses? Like, are we losing businesses because we don't have industrial land or commercial land? And on the residential, do you have any information on the demographics moving into this area? So maybe we should tackle those one at a time, Stephen. So in terms of businesses wanting to come to town and not able to find suitable sites, are you aware if that's been a problem? Or
Yeah, I know we at the city get inquiries from time to time with businesses who want to relocate here, and they have certain criteria that they need to achieve. And our industrial area is quite full already. Like, there aren't a lot of empty sites sitting around. So there have been some cases I've known where they haven't been able to locate a site or a building that meets the criteria that they need. And then on the flip side, I've been part of some kind of success stories where people have been looking for sites for their businesses and have located in the industrial area, perhaps with the help of a planning application or a temporary use permit. I know a couple facilities like that have kind of modified or at least opened up the opportunities within the industrial area and found something suitable for them. And then residential wise, well, one thing I might say before going, I'm sure Frank on his end with his background with the Penticton Industrial Development Association might know more from speaking with a lot more of those businesses than people that I've spoken with. But on the residential side, yeah, we're hearing a lot about people who are relocating to Penticton, and it's a desirable community to live. And I think in the last couple of years, people have been really looking for lifestyle and amenities, and those have factored high onto where they choose to live. And maybe the rise of remote work has opened up opportunities to relocate to smaller communities like ours. So we are seeing a lot of migration in from other parts of Canada, from BC particularly, and Alberta, coming to our community. And the housing needs assessment that I referenced earlier really put some numbers and projections towards that, with where we expect growth to go in the future, with kind of different growth projection numbers. And like I said, that will be presented to council very shortly and then publicly available from there. So we're just wrapping up the last details on that report before it goes to city council.
that's great, Stephen. I see that Brad has raised his hand, and Brad, we've turned on your microphone so that you can address the group. So please go ahead. Or you need to turn on your microphone. We're making it possible for everyone to unmute themselves if they would like to address the group. So Brad, if you can, oh, you're ready to go. Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
To let you know, I actually grew up in Penticton, so I have family here, and my dad had a business in Penticton, so quite familiar with the area. I currently live in Vancouver, but have a business here. So I have investments here and stuff in Penticton. However, I'm also involved in the industrial land area in the Vancouver area. And then Stephen, I was at the McLaren Park event also, and we had a chat there. And I guess I'm going to voice some word of caution. I'm with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, so I'm the chair of their policy council, and we're doing an industrial land report in the Lower Mainland, looking at industrial land in the Lower Mainland. And there's a severe shortage of industrial land in the Lower Mainland, such that businesses are going to Calgary, the US. It's a major concern. So we're having a report prepared on that and the economic impact that it's having in the area and on the supply chain side of it. So what has happened in the Lower Mainland is exactly what is being proposed here. Industrial lands were returned to residential, they were returned to office space, commercial space. And the result is, I guess, an industrial land market that is very, very difficult for businesses, and such that some businesses can't afford to expand and can't afford to operate in the Lower Mainland. So I guess what I'm doing is giving you a word of caution here. And once you take away industrial lands, they're almost gone forever. And why I say that, there's a lot of options for residential lands, density, those types of things. There's not a lot of options for industrial lands, and there's not a great move to convert other land uses to industrial lands. It just doesn't happen. However, there is land uses that convert to residential land. That does happen. So I just give you, I guess, a word of caution, because once it's gone forever. And that means the businesses that could have been located there and employ people in the community that is just not available. So I guess what I'm providing to you guys is just a pretty significant word of caution in this type of approach.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Brad. I've made notes of that, and I see that that we have a comment from another attendee on the financial implications, and their perspective is that it seems that the homes and businesses on proposed development sites will contribute a lot more property taxes than the current use, which they're offering pays only about 90 grand per year, and it kind of begs the question of what are the economic impacts, and to what extent are we able to kind of predict and consider that when we're looking at these changes? Tough question, Stephen?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that a little bit, and
Yeah.
I think too, it depends on, I guess, how you quantify benefits or impacts. Like there's definitely a need for employment lands and lands dedicated for those uses. And what we're hearing from some employers too is that there's a need for residential uses and homes for people to work on those employment lands. We heard that a lot through the interviews that we conducted as part of the housing needs assessment, that a lot of industries are finding it difficult to recruit and retain staff because of the housing situation in Penticton. And that's kind of, I think, the crux of this proposal is it's really, looking at this as an industrial land parcel, or this opportunity for residential with some employment lands as well, with retail, with commercial, different employment for sure, and perhaps different benefits if you put dollar numbers on it and employment levels on it. But yeah, just reflect on those pieces, and thank you, Brad, for sharing your experience down in the Lower Mainland with this type of work. It's really, really interesting to hear what is happening in other areas as well.
Yeah, but that comment that I just answered, though, they were suggesting that there's more revenues for the city in residential than industrial. But what you're suggesting is that the benefits can be further reaching, and what Brad's suggesting as well, and Frank.
Yeah, I think community benefits, like there's the dollar figure component of it for sure, but there's also, bringing people into the community and having people contribute to the community and having people fill businesses and the economic impact of that and growing both economically and in terms of population. So it can go beyond the dollar values as well.
Okay, so I see that we've got a couple of hands going up here. And before I hand those over, I do want to just share with you what Emily had to share in the Q&A. And she just she just feels that this would be a fantastic addition to the community. And given the older demographic of Penticton, she's glad to see that there'll be more housing for health workers, as she's constantly seeing people on local groups desperately searching for rentals. She suggested it'll be a great addition for much needed rentals, housing for purchase, and I think the addition of commercial space will hopefully bring in some great small businesses. So there we hear the other side of the conversation, which is really going to be what council's going to have to wrestle with when they make a decision whether or not to go the next step by giving this first reading and then having a public hearing where people can then address them directly. But so I see that both Frank and Linda have their hands up, and I didn't see who put their hands up first, but maybe we'll let Linda say hello. Linda, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then we'll go to Frank.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda. I'm curious about if this were to go ahead and be turned into residential housing with the great density that's being proposed, what current bylaws or how would the city handle potential complaints between residents in the new development over many years into the future for construction, as they border directly onto that residential, commercial, industrial land use? And some of the concerns I would be interested in hearing about would be perhaps noise, vibration, odors, high volume traffic with big vehicles at various hours, backing directly onto the industrial avenue, incoming traffic with those heavier vehicles. How would the city address concerns of residents on that property onto, if it was fully constructed out into the future for 1,500 potential home owners or home renters on that property?
Yeah, good question. The city does have bylaws in place for noise complaints between private properties. So whether that's things like mechanical equipment noise or even things like a dog barking, there's different avenues for people to go to contact bylaw services and confirm if there has been an infraction to any city bylaw in those cases. And that's something to consider with residential right beside industrial. We don't see that in too many places in Penticton, or where we do, there tends to be more of a buffer, say a road or a grade change, things like that, which can help mitigate those conflicts. But typically we see that process if there's noise complaints in general between two private properties.
Would the city consider changes possibly to the good neighbor bylaw that would maybe exempt the commercial properties next door so that they would be allowed to continue the business like Peerless to the east there? If their business was existing before this development was built out for residential, I'm just curious. I know sound tends to travel up from the ground and get more amplified the higher up it goes. And I'm just curious about how we might be able to think in advance about preparing for, decades worth of potential future complaints bordering onto the commercial area, industrial area there. And what thoughts have been put in place for how to deal, like what actions would bylaw be able to take to mitigate the impacts for all of those residents, and what's reasonable on an industrial business to mitigate their purpose of existing.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea for sure, and something that could be considered if this application goes further down the process. Right now, being at such an early stage, that's sort of the feedback that we're looking for from the community. If there's potential things to consider in the future with this proposal, or concerns, of course, with the proposal, we're open to hearing all of that at this stage and gathering that feedback. I'm not aware of something that's happened like that, where it's like a site-specific noise regulation between different properties. But just maybe at a higher level, like one of the factors that we'll have to consider with this application and we'll be working with further on is the buffering between the potential residential uses and industrial uses and what that looks like. Because again, this is conceptual. Perhaps there could be things like more of a spatial buffer between them. Maybe something physical can be constructed to help reduce some of that that noise or use conflict potential between the two different uses there. So thanks for sharing those ideas and those comments. I think that's great feedback to carry forward through the process if this application keeps going further.
Couple other continuing comments there, though, if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, for sure.
So if this was going to be a development where some of the development was going to be sold to, say, stratified owners within a tower, or if they were going to be rental units, my other question would be around, once the building existed, the Residential Tenancy Act requires the provision of something called quiet enjoyment for the residents. And if it was a strata building, I'm just thinking about the difficulties the strata would have in resolving noise conflicts or those other, I'll call them irritants that can happen with neighbors. So I'm wondering about the legalities and if the city has looked into legalities and if the city changing this designation requires some legal advice to be able to in advance mitigate some potentials as far as the development process here and require the developer to do some more thinking in that avenue. I don't know if it would be different if it was quiet enjoyment for a strata or if it would be different if it was a rental property. But if it was going to be a rental property, I think as a landlord here in Penticton, it would be incredibly difficult to manage quiet enjoyment claims from residents backing onto an industrial land.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know the details of quiet enjoyment and exactly what that entails. I do know that with this proposal, they are proposing a mix of both strata and rental, and we don't know exactly what those shares look like yet in terms of number of units being strata owned versus rented out. There's definitely places in a lot of cities, and Penticton included, where noise conflicts do come up. Like I know there might be potentially conflicts even downtown with late night restaurants and things like that. Different noise levels perhaps and different conflicts, but it's something that could be considered going forward. And yeah, something to consider as this application proceeds with the land use piece.
Thanks. That's the rest of my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I made notes on that, Linda, so that's something that we can share and discuss further. And I'll turn it back over to Frank.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, I was just going to address one point you made, and that was about sort of densification in the industrial area, which is something we'd love to be able to do. One of the issues that we have in trying to do that is a lot of the equipment that industrial companies have is so heavy that it's really difficult to do anything but put it on 12 or 24 inches of concrete on a basement, on a ground level floor to support it. It's really difficult in some of those operations to go up. Unlike as easy it is for apartments or office buildings. So that's an issue for us there in terms of having to have the actual land available to spread out on. So that's kind of a deal. And the idea of housing is been something we discuss in our meetings for our employees that we try to hire, not just housing period, but affordable housing. I know in my business, we had a fellow moved here a couple of years ago from Lethbridge, and he's making a good wage, lived in an apartment in Penticton with his family, which was really difficult for them because they're a growing family, trying to find a place that he could afford to buy in Penticton. He ended up in Karameas. That's the best that he could do, which is, so we do have some issues there. Granted, but I think that, as Brad mentioned, that housing has much more flexibility. This kind of a project could go in other parts of the city, but it would probably cost the developer 2 or 3 times as much for the land, which brings me to another caution that we need to look at, is that once we convert a piece of property like this, it makes land values in the industrial area almost prohibitive for industrial corporations to operate. As it is now, land values in industrial area are quite high. The land value of this piece of property is very high, and some of the others are. And land is like a piece of equipment. It's all part of the calculation in determining how much it's going to cost to produce that widget that comes out the door. And so if the land ends up costing 3 or 4 times what is economically viable, then the companies can't come here. And so as we raise the market value of industrial land by doing these conversions, it makes it more and more difficult for us to fill the industrial lands and for the guys that are here to stay here, because it just becomes too expensive. If we had a moratorium on industrial land conversion, that would instantly, well, not instantly, but it would eventually stabilize pricing to the place where it would be affordable for businesses to operate, because they couldn't convert it to higher value pieces of property. And
That's
so we would,
interesting.
we'd retain those high paying jobs that are in the, $40 to $50 an hour range that you're just not going to get anywhere else in town. And so I think that's still critical. And so there's, it's just trying to maintain that economic prosperity that you get from an industrial area. And so many cities in the province are regretting the fact that they've lost that. It's a real economic powerhouse, and we should be careful if we can to preserve it. Yeah, so thank you very much for allowing me to comment.
No, that's great, Frank. And yeah, so this is the political realm where it'll be up to council to kind of weigh all these different factors and decide how they want to proceed. We do have some folks are commenting on the discussion in the Q&A section, and so there was one comment about suggesting that Peerless is 30 feet higher than the site. If sound travels up, this shouldn't be an issue. I do know that Peerless, that there are residential properties that already back onto Peerless, I think. Is there not, Stephen?
No, not onto the Peerless
Okay.
site. There's a few homes on the opposite side of Carmi Ave in this area, but
Okay.
they're set quite far up a bank.
Okay.
So there's a bit of horizontal and also vertical separation there from those homes.
Okay. And so do you have any comments on this suggestion around the 30 feet higher? I'm sure that's at ground level.
Yeah, I did attend this site and there is a grade change. I don't know exactly how much higher, but there is quite a bank there already. And then the buildings on Peerless are set back a ways as well. So there is a bit of separation and sort of a natural bank, which I imagine could be preserved through this development. So the separation is there compared to like a flat, even property with each other. Is that a buffer enough, I think, is a question that I'm hearing through some of the comments that are coming up with the potential concerns with the operations behind this property. So yeah, something to consider as this proposal goes forward.
Thanks, Stephen. And then another comment on industrial lands in Metro Vancouver. There's a suggestion they're doing multi-level industrial there, and that maybe local businesses could look at better use of their lands through a similar process. So that's just a comment. And then another comment that industrial owners are resilient and they're looking after one thing, their bottom line, which is fair, but they can't voice their opinions on us homeowners. Homeowners need an affordable place to live. And as an aging population, close to a hospital is ideal. Having our kids close to us at this age is important. And so this person says they can understand development can go to a more dense area like in downtown, but will end user pay 2 to 4 times as much to live. This person suggests no. So great debate and discussion on these challenges. Like this is what you're talking about tonight. These are the challenges the city's going to face as we're trying to address the housing needs in the community. And there's balances and trade-offs, and these are going to be the difficult decisions that council's going to have to make. So I really appreciate people taking the time to share their thoughts tonight. And so we are, I think, 5 minutes out from the end of tonight's session. And I see that Linda would like to make a comment, and maybe Linda's might be the last comment. And just before you get started there, Linda, so again, we are going to be at the market on July 22nd, is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
yeah, so if you're downtown enjoying the market, you can stop by our booth at the Bank of Montreal and talk to Stephen in person. And also please please do fill out a feedback form at Shape Your City, because we'll consolidate all that and share that with the developer as well as with staff and council. And so again, thank you for everyone attending tonight, and I'll just turn it over to Linda for some final thoughts.
I agree. This is going to be a really tough, challenging topic for council to make some choices on. I'm grateful for an opportunity to comment and ask questions. I did just want to ask, and I know you won't have an answer now, but just for curiosity, as the process moves forward, I'm curious about what kind of complaints that the city may have received with regards to the Good Neighbor bylaw for properties that are already backing onto industrial land, perhaps off of Carmi Avenue, higher up where they're overlooking the industrial, or from Wiltsey overlooking from the other side, that sort of area up the other end. I'm curious about what the impacts are, and I'm curious about what resolution options people have been seeking and what has worked with noise mitigation and what hasn't, noise or odor or other irritants. I'm just curious because those homes are also up higher on the banks. And I'm just curious what the impacts to those residents who are living there now, but also taking into consideration they're just a little further set back, perhaps. Just curious, and maybe that would help to shape the future conversation a little bit more.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, Blake.
And I probably should have jumped in earlier. Stephen doesn't use our Good Neighbor bylaw probably as much as I do with the bylaw department, but there is an exemption in the Good Neighbor bylaw for typical industrial noises. So if you are operating a business in a way that's normal for that industry that you're operating, then the Good Neighbor bylaw restrictions about noise don't apply to that business. We have had instances, and the areas that you're specifically speaking about, the Wiltsey area, Carmi area, we do get complaints every now and then. Around the foundry, sometimes the odors from the foundry, sometimes the noise from Peerless, but usually it's a message back that that's the area of town you live in, and that's one of the nuisances. Similar to agricultural areas with agricultural spray, you know, downtown areas like Stephen mentioned with the vibrancy we're trying to create and the nightclubs that we're having, and even the breweries and patios having impacts on residential there. So we do get questions into the city about what the rules are around those things, but yeah, there is that exemption. That exemption is in place, and I think in a situation like this, you have to understand if you're buying or renting a place that's that proximity or that adjacency to that potentially nuisance creating business, then that's where you're choosing to live. Just like if you're choosing to live on a busy street or under the airport, you're gonna put up with planes flying overhead. That's part of living in the city. But there are those exceptions that are included in there.
Thanks for that. I'm just curious what people are also looking for a resolution, even if they don't have an avenue to do that. What are they asking for?
I know in the past we have had residents reach out directly to businesses. I know in the downtown, getting music turned down or looking at different alternatives. Light pollution is something that we have helped resolve before. If there's glare from commercial lights, we've tried to work with the businesses to minimize glare. So we do, like at the city through our bylaw department, we do try to find resolutions, even if it's not a bylaw violation. Often businesses, they want to be good neighbors and they're gonna try their best, but they have to do their business to the best they have to operate their business as well. That's their livelihood. But I find almost any time that we've gone to a business, even the foundry I know has done scrubbers and stuff to try to minimize nuisance odors from their exhaust. Walmart, we've had issues with them with their refrigerator trucks and finding ways for them to build sound attenuation fencing and move them, even though they're not in violation of a bylaw. Just trying to be good corporate citizens. So I think we try to facilitate those discussions. A lot of residents are hesitant to go directly to a business and complain about things, but that's a role that we can play to say, hey, we've received some comments about this. Obviously, with this new development going in, it's going to be something we want to consider upfront. So is there sound attenuation fencing we can put in beforehand? Is there a certain setback from some of those industrial uses that we can create with another use? So I think those are things that we're, the first question we need to answer is, do we support residential here? And then the second bit is how it's all going to work from a traffic and a nuisance perspective and all those other things that we need to figure out.
Great, thanks for that, Blake. And that's a good segue into just reminding people where we're at on the process. So at this point, we are just considering the land use amendment. And so the next step is once the engagement process closes on July 3rd, all the feedback will be gathered and shared with the developer. And then should the developer want to proceed to an application, it'll then go to council and they'll consider whether or not they want to give the amendments first reading, which would then trigger a public hearing. And so for those folks here, if you live in the vicinity of this development, you should have received a letter from the city. And if you did, you will receive a further letter if council considers or would like to give it first reading and go to a public hearing. And for those of you who do not live in the vicinity but have an interest in this project, please do just pay attention to newspaper ads and the city's social media. And if you register with Shape Your City Penticton, you'll get a direct email about it. So that's how you can stay informed on this proposal as this process moves forward. And with that, I do see there's one kind of further comment on the potential financial implications. We have made notes of everything we've heard tonight, and it's still light out and it's a beautiful night. So with that, we'll give you back the rest of your evening. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating tonight.